Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today's guest has been on the show many times before. He has a lifelong interest in UFOs. He is a former police officer. He runs an online magazine about UFOs. Can you tell who it is yet? Welcome back, Gary Heseltine.
Thanks for having me back.
Now then, Gary, last time I spoke to you, we were at the 2015 UFO Truth Magazine conference.
Yep.
And you had speakers from all over the world there. I spoke there, you spoke there. Give us a review of your own conference.
Well, it was quite an ambitious task for me because we went to a bigger venue, the main hall. We went from 120 a day to a seating capacity of 280 a day. Well, the good news is that over 2 days we put 550 people, bums on seats. So it was a resounding success. So it proved that we could expand. And all the feedback that I've had since the conference is very complimentary, so that's pleasing for me, especially the hard work praised of the helpers that I have and family members and those people who work in the kitchens and things like that. They do a fantastic job, and we're all part of a team, and you're only as good as your team, as from my point of view. So it's a big thank you to them and all the people that came. Speakers were great, absolutely to a T. Everybody delivered a high quality lecture.
All right, and two of the most notable speakers were Stanton Friedman and Gavaerd.
Yep.
Just to touch on Gavaerd first, because I believe he's actually had access to government agencies and government files in Brazil, which is unlike what we get in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, what AJ has been able to do with the Brazilian Defence Minister and Brazilian military is unheard of. It's a bit like us going to the MOD and say we'd like to sit down and have some kind of official protocol on how to handle the disclosure of files. Well, it would be laughed in your face in the UK, but in Brazil he's managed to get that, and they sit down perhaps 3 times a year, and they openly sit down alongside a big table with one half military, Defence Minister, and one half of the Brazilian researchers, and they talk about cases that they'd like to be released and when are we going to get this, and it's all done on an official basis. Now, that's a tremendous step forward, and I only wish it could be replicated in the UK. Right. As far as I'm aware, that's the best platform yet for UFO stroke integration with the mainstream military and government. Right.
One country that I seem to recall did have a dialogue with its amateur ufologists was Belgium.
Yeah.
Especially with the
Belgian wave, 89 to 91.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that was kind of unprecedented, and that's one of my favourite areas anyway for the evidential basis of UFOs. You know, when the famous night, 30th, 31st of March 1990. You've got your 2 F-16s chasing unidentified target, all the telemetry data, 7 independent radars, 3 military, 4 commercial, different types of radar, all the telemetry data examined, and at times the object was pulling in excess of 35 Gs. Well, we know from stealth that the maximum now in 2015 is 11 to 12. So this is an object almost pulling 3 times. So yeah, really good case, Belgian case.
Yeah, so it's either some extraterrestrial craft or it's some covert military or government craft using a like jet propulsion system, some field-based propulsion.
As Colonel de Boer said when they did the mass press conference to address the Belgian sightings, he said, in his opinion, this is not stealth because the flight characteristics are like on anything he's ever seen before. So he was ruling out stealth. Obviously, there might be secret stuff, but I don't think we can do anything that can pull 35 Gs.
Right. Well, if you look at Ed Foucher's stuff, they've got field-based propulsion systems which get round that problem of Gs. But that's another area.
Yeah, that is another area, and there may well be man-made UFOs, but certainly their origin, from my point of view, is ET.
It may well be, yes. Now, what about Gavaerd's information at the conference? Just give us a summary of that.
Well,
what are these Brazilian government files telling us?
Well, he has got frustrations with the Brazilian government because when they've sat down, they openly admit that they're still holding on to some of the very best cases, and they're trying to put pressure on them for a timetable of release. I mean, we're aware of Operation Prato, the Operation Saucer that was in the Colares region of Amazon. I think we talked about it before. Well, the reality is that we know that from the 4-month study that was done at the time in the 70s, that there was something like 16 hours of video footage or cinefilm footage over 400 photographs. Well, they certainly haven't got any of the cine footage, and I've talked to AJ about it, and he doesn't think they'll ever release that if they still have it, because he fears that if they did that, that really would be the game changer, because don't forget, this was military witnesses filming UFOs at close proximity. But what we already have from that case is amazing, because we've got these many detailed drawings of various types of craft that were coming close to the military positions. So they were getting photographed and they were getting visually drawn, etc., by people on the scene who were all military people. This isn't the local villagers. So the evidence that's come out so far is already outstanding, but he's frustrated that he can't get to these very best.
Right. And just give us a sense of the volume of files that AJ Gavaerd has.
Well, I think they've released over something like 10,000 pages of material to him over a variety of cases. I mean, they have what's called the Brazilian Night of the UFOs, which is like overflight by, I think, up to 20-25 UFOs being chased and caught on radar. That was a major case. And obviously you've got cases like Virginia, where the creatures were found and recovered. A soldier died from being in close proximity. So the Brazil itself has had some amazing cases.
And how much influence do you think America has over the releasing of these Brazilian files, Gary?
I think they're the key to all of this. I think I've said this before. America, the most secretive government, they own the subject of UFOs worldwide. And interestingly, what emerged from the sightings in the Amazon is that AJ Gavaerd was told that it finished after 4 months. The military pulled the plug. But the latest information is that the Americans came in and it continued in secret afterwards.
Right.
So I think basically wherever in the world it is, the Americans will turn up in some guise as a consultant in some capacity.
And I say, my 4 conclusions, let me be clear about this. I don't shilly-shally. 1, the evidence is overwhelming. Planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underlined 27 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. I don't care about them. The basketball coach doesn't care about the 98% of the people that aren't 7 feet tall. Give me the one who is. Heck with the rest, you know. Second conclusion is we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate, meaning some few people in major governments have known since at least 1947 that some UFOs are alien spacecraft. You don't keep secrets by telling everybody and hoping nobody talks. I worked under security for 14 years. The third conclusion is there are no good arguments against the first 2 conclusions. And the fourth conclusion is we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. I'd say 2 millennia, then I get into religious arguments, and I don't want to deal with those at this point. So I have been speaking out for all those years, and I've only had 11 hecklers, and 2 of them were drunk. And the audience took care of the others. So I say this to encourage people. I'm giving a paper next week, How to Make Ufology Respectable.
Okay, very fascinating.
And one of them is, don't be an apologist ufologist.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid to speak out. Be like this man over to my right.
Now then, you've already sold, what, 20% of the tickets for next year's
within
2016?
Within 3 to 4 weeks now since they went on board. I think it's 3 weeks, over 20%. And the headline speaker already confirmed is Travis Walton, a kid fire in the sky, the logger in the woods who gets abducted and turns up 5 days later when all his friends have basically been arrested on suspicion of murder.
So this is in Holmfirth again?
Yeah, at a different venue though. Right. Sadly, the venue that we were at, which was the Civic Hall in Holmfirth, they're no longer taking bookings after March of next year.
Right.
And it looks like, due to government cutbacks, the historic Civic Hall in Holmfirth may be closing. Well, I sincerely hope that doesn't happen, but I have to organise a conference ahead of time. So I found another venue which in some ways may prove even better, which is the local music venue, which is called the Picture Drome. It regularly holds music conferences and has capacity for I think up to 320 a day. So we could be looking at 640 people over 2 days.
Right, and just give us a bit more detail on Travis Walton. He was a lumberjack, 1974.
75, I think.
75.
Yep.
And
I think he was with a team of loggers in the middle of nowhere, felling trees, and then as they were driving, they saw a light in the forest. They drove towards it. They come across a strange object that's just hanging in the light. And Travis is the one who gets out of the vehicle and approaches the light, and then he's kind of hit by some kind of beam. And at that point, all his friends think he's been taken, and they just run off basically, or drive off in panic, as you perhaps would. They then realise that they've left him behind and go back. They can't find him. They then report that he's missing. The police think they've maybe had an argument, and they've murdered him, hidden the body somewhere. And then literally 5 days later, he's found, I think, naked in a little village, a little store in the middle of nowhere. And he was in a terrified, frightened state, quivering wreck. And basically over a period of time, he begins to say that he was taken aboard a craft of some description.
Yes.
Now, I've met Travis Walton in 2010 in America, and we had a brief discussion, and I said, well, what did you make of the Fire in the Sky film? And he basically said the stuff on the ground, the way it was acted, and the way that the villagers thought that they'd murdered him, he says, very realistic. He says, but where Hollywood kind of got involved was on board the craft. He says that was all fiction, the way it was portrayed on the screen. So again, Travis Walton passed lie detectors on several occasions, arguably the most famous living abductee. So you know, for me, I've met him. He's a very credible guy. He's not kind of power's not gone to his head. He's just a very level-headed guy. Unfortunately, he's one of these guys that got caught up in something beyond his control. But he's very level-headed, and I think he's a very powerful speaker for that reason.
And if I recall, he was about 25 at the time in 1975.
I'm not sure, but he was in his mid-20s, I think.
Right,
yeah.
So he would be approximately 65.
Yeah, probably in his mid-60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that, Gary. We'll continue after the break, and I just want to ask Gary a few more questions about what did happen on the craft that Travis Walton was allegedly taken on board. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, former police detective and UFO researcher, and we were discussing the Travis Walton case because Travis Walton is coming to the UK in 2016 to tell the UK public all about what happened to him when he was on board a UFO spacecraft. Now, Gary, you said that the film Fire in the Sky, which was a Hollywood film all about the Travis Walton case, the stuff on the craft, they made it up. They didn't tell the true story. I'll just ask you first. Yeah. Why do you think they've done that? The story on the ground, he said, was accurate, but everything that was happened on the spaceship was complete fiction. So what's going on there?
Well, I mean, it did show that he was being medically examined, but I think it was the way they visually portrayed it, which was nothing like he recalled. I think Hollywood does that because they're trying to make it into something that they don't really want to tell the truth about UFOs, and I think that they have to kind of sensationalize it and turn it into, I don't know, great media. You know, they just want to make it more exciting and make it more of an independent state instead of just telling the stories it really is. Right,
because if I remember rightly, there was quite a gruesome scene where he's on this operating table and they're sticking things in his face and his eyes and all of this.
Well, I think what happens is that after his first recollection on waking up is that he wakes up and he finds himself being examined.
Let me interrupt you there, Gary. This is the true story you're talking
this is the true story. He wakes up and he finds himself being examined, and the small creatures around him, he's absolutely terrified. He looks for something to hit. He wants to hit out. He's frightened stiff. He wants to escape. And then at that point, when he gets aggressive, these small creatures, which we would probably term as greys, they leave the room, and then the humanoid figure then comes in who tries to placate him, and starts showing him around this strange craft. So, I mean, it's an amazing story. And the thing was, he underwent regression in the sense of he had lie detector tests, and he passed those lie detector tests. I mean, they brought in two top guys. I think he was done twice, and he passed them both times. So this is a guy who stuck to his story in what is absolutely bizarre circumstances. And of course, we're looking at 1975. Other than really the Barney and Betty Hill case from 1961, there's really not much prior to that, or maybe the Anthony Villalobos from 57 in South America, but that's really it, and not many people would have been aware of it. So this is a major, major case that went worldwide because he was just an ordinary guy, and of course because he disappeared for 5 days, and they really did think that he'd been murdered in that missing 5-day period.
Now, so if you want to meet Travis Walton, get yourself to Gary's conference next year, because he's
September
coming to
the 10th and 11th next year. Be there, because I think it'll be a sellout event.
Right. Now, just to go back to A.J. Gavaerd, tell us about the flying ovens of the Amazon.
Right, yeah, well, A.J. Gavaerd was obviously one of the speakers, and he stayed at my house for several days before and after the conference. And we obviously got talking about things, and I'm taking him around doing a bit of sightseeing. But in the conversation in the car, he disclosed to me that for something like over the last 15 to 18 years, 15 times in the last 18 years, he has taken about a 10-day trip up the Amazon, way up the Amazon, going like off-road in a little boat, going up to these little tiny huts who really have no contact with the outside world, and starts collecting stories. And he said, when I collect UFO stories up there, he says they can only describe things in the terms that they're familiar with, the language that they're familiar with. And he highlights this case of a flying oven. And he's thinking, flying oven? And what the hell's a flying oven? Well, eventually it turns out that the oven is a circular pit that they do all the cooking in. So it's a circular disc shape. And when he saw it, he realised that it's a flying disc. And that's the only language they could describe it in. But one of the things that I said to him was, the curse of being an editor of a magazine is, and I think Graham Birdsall as well with UFO magazine, he did a great magazine, but he never got a book out there because he's running a magazine. And I said, well, that's your book. You must tell the world about all these cases that you've got. And he said, well, you must do the same with your police sightings. So we've kind of like had a private bet. You've got to get yours done and I've got to get mine done.
All right, that sounds like a good idea. And the Proof-Os database continues to expand, and you only allow police sighting witness cases in that.
Yeah, you're serving or retired,
right.
On duty and off duty cases. I mean, because of the launch of the magazine, my research into it isn't anything like it was, but the cases still come in. And we're now looking at over 550 cases, going back to 1901, involving over about 1,050 British police officers. Well, that's a lot. And yet, interestingly, mainstream media are not interested at all in this. Even though I write to them, they're not interested at all. So I'll probably have to self-publish that book.
So have you ever had police officers contact you and ask them to remove their case because of some pressure or anything like that?
No, never yet. There's a general rule though. If you're a serving officer, they're very frightened about what could happen to their career, getting into trouble, so they request anonymity, and that's fine as long as they prove who they are to me. Then I'll give them that confidentiality to get the story out there. If they're retired, they're generally quite happy to have their name. They've got the pension, so they feel less threatened. But there still is this major fear of ridicule and perceived risk to their careers, especially if you're serving.
Now, you mentioned mainstream media there, and I've attacked the mainstream media in every way, shape, form I can.
You attacked the media? Oh, I can't believe that.
I was approached by the same production company that you were approached.
Yes.
I don't know, it was maybe last year or the year before.
It's probably a good 18 months ago now.
Yes. Now, this was Plum Pictures, who produced a documentary for Channel 4. It was originally going to be called The Big E.T. Cover-Up, but I think they decided on The Big UFO
I did a day's film of it.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that. This was, I'll just inform the viewers of this documentary.
And subtle use of editing, because I didn't appear in it.
Yes, yes. So they asked me to take part. I recorded the telephone call with the producers or the researcher and I thought I exposed what they were really up to, because they couldn't give me any sight or control of the information, which because I don't trust mainstream media, they couldn't agree to my conditions, so I don't take part. Please go away. I know it's going to be some despicable hit piece, which it turned out to be.
Absolutely.
Presented by a comedian, Dan Schreiber. So they go along to Gary's house because Gary's a bit more sort of understanding than me with regards mainstream media. I think he's more willing to take part in their
I think the reality is we have different views. We've talked about it, that you take that your view. I try to, because I think that we should be trying on the inside to try to mainstream media. So for me, your approach is very valid, and I think my approach is, so we're like two different prongs of the fork, as it were.
So tell me, so what, did they come to your house?
Yeah, they interviewed me. That
tell
guy.
Me how long they were in your house for?
They interviewed me for a good 2 hours in my office, and then they actually even drove over to Scunthorpe, where I had my original sighting as a teenager. We went down to the alleyway where I took them all down there, and they said, this is great. So literally a whole day's filming, and I didn't appear in the programme once.
So they cut your contribution out entirely?
Absolutely, because it wouldn't fit with their agenda.
So did you watch the documentary?
I did watch it, and it was a hit piece. And I always suspected it would be, but when I speak, I tend to go quite quick when I'm doing these filming, especially if it's for people who I think may be trying to do a hit piece, because it makes it very hard to edit if I'm going blah, 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 blah. So I talk very fast, and I think it would have been very hard to edit mine without it looking deliberately edited out.
All right, we'll not mention those who were in it. Well, Timothy Good was in it.
Yes,
but
and
what I gathered from that was, you see Dan Schreiber arriving with him saying hello, and then it suddenly cuts to Timothy Good slouching in a chair, where he
would never do.
He clearly doesn't know he's being filmed.
No, absolutely.
And he's talking about the possibility that Christ was an example of a artificial insemination or some sort of alien thing, and he clearly doesn't realise it's being filmed. So I suspect exactly the same happened with Tim Good. They sat there for 2 hours getting all of his military cases,
and I think I was probably being secretly filmed as well.
Right.
Makes perfect sense, but I was kind of aware that they might be doing that, so I didn't really give them an opportunity. But that kind of shows you what the program was about.
And some people in the UFO field say things like, "You've got to give them a chance, Richard."
Well, I take the view that we've got to work with the mainstream media to try to change things, because I have been involved in several mainstream media documentaries that have tried to do a decent piece. It depends on which the production companies. Unfortunately, some of our terrestrial British TV channels are less than honest about what their true agenda is.
My advice to anyone who's asked to take part in any British documentary, whether it be UFOs or any other subject, ask if you can see the finished item before it airs, so that you can watch what's going to be screened, and if you're not happy with it, that they can change it to represent more what you really mean. Right?
Yeah.
And if you say that, they will run a mile.
Absolutely, yeah. They're never going to give you that power.
No. Okay, now let's just go back to PRUFOs, the police reporting of UFO sightings. You're going to put that in a book.
Yeah, I'm probably about 40% of the way through it.
Right.
It's something that I do every now and again on the back burner, but I realise that I keep putting the date back. So I have now got to make a conscious decision, certainly between now and the summer of 2016, to get it out there, because it should be out there.
How's that going to read though, Gary? Because it's Case 1, Jimmy Smith, police officer, 1974, sees disc in Scunthorpe. Then Case 2...
Actually, that's a very interesting thing, because part of me has always liked reference books. And you could easily turn the PRUFOs into a reference book, but without giving any personal interpretation. And I had this kind of ethical discussion with myself. Do I tell it as a history story, just chronological, tell the facts as they were, but not put an interpretation on it? Or do I, with what I already know of the subject, put an interpretation on it? And in the end, I had to say I've got to put an interpretation on it. Otherwise, I'm doing a disservice to it, because I know the reality of what's going on, and I will, where the cases points to me to represent something that's totally unfamiliar with our aircraft, I will say that. So I will kind of like put my spin on the more detailed cases and tell you what I think they are. And what I would say is that not every case on the database is ET. Many will have a plausible explanation, perhaps, but there are certainly, I would think, 3/4 of the cases, which is nigh on 750 officers, that point to something flying in our airspace, and it ain't stealth, and it's not ours, and it's ET.
Right. All right. But how are you going to cram so many cases in? Do you going to leave some out?
No, you can't report on all 550, but what you'll draw reference to them, but you will expand on certain cases where more is known. And it will be a mixture of looking at the cases that's come to me personally. There are some very well-known cases already that are out there. There will also be a chapter on overseas, worldwide sightings, just to point out the similarities of what's been seen. There's nothing unique about the UK. The database is pretty unique because nobody else has got a police database with this many cases. So that's unique. But what I'm saying is that at the beginning of the book, will lay out basically a kind of an interpretation of what to look for, which is what I do when I do my proof force lecture, because they have to know what evidence is, and they have to kind of know what things to look for. And I think that's, so when you see these cases where you'll have an object making instant acceleration, instant stop, these are things that I will discuss as what I would call genuine ET characteristics that's been established over the 70 years. So the preface of the book really will be a bit of a going over of some of the best evidence that points towards ET, and then in light of that you can then better interpret the cases that I'll be highlighting. And
as we said before, you were quite keen to get that put on film. Professionally made film about the best proof force cases. So if anyone's out there wants to take you up on that.
Well, over the years, the media have come to me, and I've made lots of documentaries, and they said, I'll make a great documentary. And the only one that came close to it was UFO Hunters programme with Bill Burns, and we did have several police officers that I set up, but what they, in the end, they kind of like chickened out of it, and they ended up doing two American cases and I think 3 UK cases. But they also, there was one guy who came up and filmed with a great case, and he was totally edited out of the programme. So why that was, I don't know. But there should be, at some point, I have enough officers that we could do a good hour's documentary with 8 to 10 police officers who are ready to go on camera.
All right, Gary, thanks for that. After the break, we're going to talk about the alien agenda. Welcome back. I'm talking to former detective Gary Heseltine about the subject of ufology. Now then, Gary, most people in ufology know what the word disclosure means. This is begging the government to tell the public the truth about UFOs and what they know about secret files and this kind of thing. What do you mean by the alien agenda?
What I mean by that is that 2 years ago, in the mainstream media, and this is the BBCs of this world, put out a big scientific thing saying that within 20 years, with the advance of new radio telescopes coming online, that they were going to find an intelligent signal within 20 years. So that was 2013. So in a sense, I think that starts the disclosure clock ticking in the mainstream. So at the very latest date, we're looking at 2033. So we're already 2 years into it. So for me, what I see happening is there's an alien agenda in the sense of the mainstream media, and I think it's going to be kicking and screaming, are going to be dragged to look at and re-examine the UFO subject, because they're going to have to confront it, because we are probably going to be the generations that are the first in human history with official contact. So let's say it gets to 2033 and they say, yeah, we've got an intelligent signal. Well, the reality is that unless they've started to prepare for that eventuality, which I'm sure they will have in the years that come, they'll have to redress the whole subject. But say they get to 2033, they could have a situation where a radio telescope says, yeah, we've got an intelligent signal, we're pretty happy that's an intelligent signal. Well, what if that signal from the other end goes, okay, we now realise we've been listening to your broadcast, you now made contact, we'll see you next week.
All right. Now, let me just interject there, because in my opinion of that, they're saying we will probably have, or we will have contact from ETs by 2033. Now, in my opinion, whichever way you look at it, it's a lie. And I'll tell you why.
Yep.
Because if what you believe to be true is true,
yep,
that UFOs have been in our airspace for
Absolutely.
at least decades.
Yeah.
They're bound to have had signals from them with their
I suspect so,
surveillance program,
Yeah.
which means they've already had a signal, which means they're actually lying about 2033. They've already had signals. So that's one
But
possibility.
that might be the date that they've officially set
Yes.
to get rid of this
Yes.
problem.
Yeah. Now, if they haven't already had signals, how the hell would they know they're going to have a signal by 2033? So it would be a lie on that count. So I don't trust anything that comes from the official sources.
Absolutely.
Probably less than you do.
But my
you're
point,
trying to read into what they're saying.
yeah, my point is when the mainstream starts saying something in a fixed amount of years, i.e. within 20 years we've got an intelligent signal, it means that even by their own standards, they've set a clock running. Because it's like the boy who cried wolf. You've set a time limit, you've got to deliver. So by 2033, they've said they're going to get a signal. So they're going to have to start preparing for that eventuality. And this is where I'd say it'll be kicking and screaming, because they're then going to have to re-examine in the run-up to 2033 all of their attitude towards UFOs, because they may well be dealing with them the next year. And that, but the reality is, if they're not prepared, say it does happen in 2033, this alien race could say, yeah, we realise you've now picked us up, thanks for that, we'll now start speaking to you, we'll see you next week. Now they may be a million years ahead of us in technology, so for them they can make that million years in a week. Now how would the Earth be prepared for that? Totally underprepared.
Yeah, the way I look at it is they've got 18 years to get their disinformation prepared.
Absolutely.
So
But it's an interesting.
I
just
see,
think it's a time frame that they've put on themselves.
Yes.
Why?
Yes, I see. And just to reiterate, I don't think disclosure can come from a government, at least the governments we have now.
Yeah, I think the way governments are and the way America dominates the subject of ufology, I can't see us having a breakthrough in the mainstream at all. It'd be nice if ET decides to show us, but there may be reasons why they don't, or certainly that I suspect there's many species involved in this, and that would account for why we have so many diverse types of craft seen. When we look at animal mutilations, possible human mutilations, when you look at crop circles, it's all a facet by perhaps many species.
Okay. And you also, in your latest issue of the magazine, have written about another, we might call it mainstream disclosure, and that is NASA talking about water on Mars again. So just give us a summary of that, and then I'll give you my sort of angle on it.
Yeah, no. What I find fascinating is I think NASA lies about everything, and it could well be disinformation. But I do think we probably found life in the mid-70s. I think it was Gilbert Levin, the scientist, said that he had a test that was, I think, from the Viking land in 1976 that proved life was there. He expected it to be all on the news, and then it was covered up.
He may have proved that life was in the Canadian Arctic, but carry on.
Yeah, maybe so. But what I'm saying is, when the mainstream start saying, we now found liquid water, which all of us that are kind of like non-mainstream have thought, well, there's bound to be liquid water in there if you've got ice and whatever. It's now the trickle effect, and over the last couple of years it strikes me that we're getting to see more of this trickle effect of the mainstream kind of preparing the groundwork for the public to be told, yes, there is life. It might be microscopic life from their point of view, but then again, if you then add that to what they're saying about the radio telescopes and an intelligence signal, this is taking it beyond just microscopic life. There are all these kind of equations that saying life is probably teeming in space, which is what we suspect already. We already know that they're coming here. I'm absolutely happy to say that they are coming here. But from their point of view, they're now just dipping their toes into the water, as it were, and I think it's all part of a gradual, whether it be disinformation or otherwise, it's still a kind of a gradual release of information that life is out there and it's probably teeming.
I have noticed that Brian Cox has said similar things.
Yeah.
He keeps saying, do you think there'll be microbial life discovered on Mars or in the solar system? Do you think microbial life? Yeah. So it's as if he's been programmed to keep saying that word, even though, according to NASA's own images, there's a crinoid fossil on Mars, and which is not microbial life. It's a thing which swims around the ocean. Look it up, crinoid, right? What's it doing in the NASA photographs? So I'm in two minds. I don't know whether that's the NASA photographs have been taken on Mars. I've said it several times. Well, 75% it was taken. They were taken on Earth. So
I certainly think some of them are taken on Earth, and they certainly are not dealing with for me, the images that are purported to be on Mars that get me the most are not the ones that are in rocks or whatever. It's the flying ones. If something flies through the screen over multiple shots taken 4 minutes, 8 minutes apart, then that's clearly something in the sky. Now, NASA just don't talk about these very credible cases where objects are seen against the backdrop of mountains. So this is below the sky level, and it's, you know, I think there's one case where there's 4 objects all in a line against the backdrop of Mars mountains. So this is clearly below the mountaintop level, and these should be explained, and they just don't say anything about it.
I did see one like that. I don't know if it's the one that you've seen, and it looked like a bird, but on closer examination it was a repeating artifact, so it was something on or near the lens, right?
Well,
so
I've looked at many of these images and gone to the actual image reference, and they're often taken 4 minutes apart. So if you've got something it turns up in 3 consecutive photographs from different angles over a 12-minute period, then something is clearly flying around there. And NASA just don't explain these. They just don't say anything.
The images of Mars are fascinating wherever they've come from.
Absolutely.
And it's evidence that's been put from NASA to the public. I'm not sure what they're of or where they're from, but many of them show these anomalies. Absolutely. And they don't seem to be some barren, lifeless planet in many of the images. Absolutely. And when I managed to get communication with the chief engineer of the Mars Curiosity program, and he agreed to answer all my questions, this was one of the things that we put to him. Andrew Johnson sent him links to several of the unexplained images that he's encountered. So we weren't saying they're not from Mars, we weren't saying that they represent life. We're saying, wow, we can't explain this. What's NASA's explanation? And they've never put out detailed explanations for many of the anomalous images. That's the point, isn't it?
And it's the deafening silence. Having said that, NASA's whole attitude to anything, questions on UFOs, space and whatever, is basically say nothing. Because if they say something, they then have to defend it when people research what they've said. And so by saying nothing, it's actually a very clever ploy.
It's a classic police tactic, Gary, isn't it?
Say nothing and then you can't get condemned either way.
Right. All right, and we'll continue this after the break. Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, who is the founder of UFO Truth magazine. And as part of that, you organise these quite big conferences every year. I was at the last one, I was at the one before that, and I've been to many other UFO conferences and similar sort of events. And I'm now convinced that at these events are what would commonly be termed spooks. I'm absolutely convinced that there are certain people who are trying to manipulate and steer things, and other people who are perhaps just recording what's going on. And I could sit here and name probably half a dozen people who I consider were of that in that category at your conference, but I can't name them because I haven't got absolute proof. I've only got some circumstantial evidence. But what's your thought on it, Gary?
Well, put it this way, logically, if you were interested in finding out what was going on at UFO conferences, it would make sense for you to plant people into the audience as just ordinary members of the public. So that's, to me, as a former detective, perfectly plausible ploy. Now, funnily enough, as you say that, there was a guy who sat on the front row of the conference for 2 days, and of course, because I'm the host and introducing people, I'm at the front of the stage a lot, so perhaps I notice more. But there was a guy that was sat there, and every time I looked at him, he had his legs crossed, he looked bored silly, he weren't even really looking at any of the lectures, and I'm thinking, why the hell are you there? You know, and it's only because I'm the host, and I literally don't get the time. But I meant to go up to him and say, are you all right? because he just sat there with his legs crossed. He looked absolutely bored silly, as if he was there not for his own choice. Somebody put him there.
Yeah.
But it looks most bizarre.
All right.
So maybe, who knows?
Right. Okay.
I kind of think that these things go on, but there's little I can do about them. So I kind of just accept that it's going on, but I can only concentrate on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I'm very wary of people who can try to manipulate you. And certainly historically, when you look at some of the major organisations, NICAP, and I would even say the UFO was infiltrated from skeptics from within, who then destroyed the credibility of the organisation. So I think that's the classic way that it's been done in the past.
Right.
And I think you like to remain independent.
Yeah.
I like to remain independent for that very same reason.
Yes.
That I haven't got to report to anybody else. And nobody's going to deflect me away from telling what I perceive as the UFO truth.
I think from what I picked up, one of the strategies is that one or more of the speakers might have part of the content of their talk is disinformation, which you're not going to be able to control and vet every piece of information which is put before the audience.
No.
And I think some of the audience are encouraging or making sure that the disinformation is carried well throughout the audience. You see what I mean? So they've possibly got people, the speakers or audience, or both working together to influence. And then there's also the monitoring and feeding back, which I think Graham Birdsall used to actually greet the. I
think he used to say there was two there always at his conference, and he'd go up to them and say hello.
Yeah,
just to point them out.
Right. So one of the themes at next year's conference is best of British. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's an idea I've had for a while, and now because we're getting to a stage where we're having bigger audiences, and I'm getting confident that we can pull off a good, entertaining conference for 2 days, is that I think the time has come where we should really be kind of celebrating the best of some of the British cases that we've had literally since the Second World War, and indeed some of the classic cases through the war. So one of the things that I will be doing, regardless of other speakers, and obviously there will be other speakers announced in due time, but I will be doing a lecture on one day, on the Saturday, and a lecture on the Sunday, where I do an A and B presentation about the best of British cases. And I may expand that to include the best of Scottish cases, best of Irish cases, so we'll just see where that goes. But that's going to be like a sub-theme for the conference, is that I think it's time that we started telling the real story of the best evidence. Because one of the things that came out from a conference, and it came out of actually the UFO Mastermind quiz, which is something I'd never tried before, don't think it had ever been done in any UFO conference before, but I did it just as a kind of light-hearted, but the serious thing is to test the audience knowledge. Now, lots of people came up to me and said that was a great idea, but we wanted to know more. So I think there's a lot of people out there, and of course with all the millions of websites out there on UFOs, there's so much disinformation out there. I think a lot of people actually don't know the wheat from the chaff. So one of the reasons why I think that this is a good time to do it is to address that and start saying, these are the best cases that we've had in the last 70 years, and you should be aware of them. So it increases the audience knowledge.
Right, yeah. I don't think there's anyone can claim to absolutely know the wheat, the wheat from the chaff.
No.
There's so much chaff about.
Yes, there is so much chaff about. But we must attempt, from what we know of the best cases, to try to tell that best story. And I don't think anybody has addressed that ever at a British conference yet.
So you had some audience participation in the last conference, which was very successful, and I think we underestimate the audiences in some of these conferences.
Absolutely, and one thing that came really clear from the UFO Mastermind quiz was that they wanted to know more. And in fact, lots of them said, we want to know the answers to your questions. We didn't know them. And that kind of surprised me, because I didn't think the questions were that hard, but they clearly did, and the contestants actually struggled quite a lot. So it kind of gave me an idea of where a lot of the audience is, and I think that's because there's so many sites out there, they really don't know what they're looking at, and they need some kind of guidance as to what is the best, or what's perceived to be the best of cases.
Right. And quite often audience members will come up with gems of information as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's one case I recently did a conference in Truro, and a guy came to me with an anecdote about the Queen, believe it or not. But I'm not going to tell you that yet because I've asked him to come back to me so I can fill in more detail. He did tell me an anecdote, but I said before I go on to that, you need to supply me with a bit more information. But it was Queen and the UFOs,
Right.
put it that way, which was interesting. But a very interesting thing happened. You get some really strange things happens over the years, quite unexpected. My wife was during the first day of the conference, an elderly lady apparently just popped into the reception area and just gave, it turned out my wife, this old magazine. And she said, my husband's dead, but he used to be interested in the subject, thought your husband might like this. Well, sure enough, there's this magazine, and it's in pristine condition. It's from 1955, and it's called The Flying Saucer News, which I'd never even heard of. So straight out of this, so I said, has she left a telephone number? Yes, she has. Cutting a long story short, I went to see her, and it turns her husband out had been a photographer for the Huddersfield Examiner newspaper for about 25 years, till his death, retirement and death. But basically, he'd always had a passion for UFOs, and he'd been one of the founder members of this. And it turns out that this was a mixture of the Flying Saucer News was an amalgamation of two clubs that basically come together in 1954, come together to produce this short-run little magazine, but in pristine condition. And what a marvellous lady, kind-hearted gesture, fantastic.
And other audience members provide sort of, well, I'm not sure whether it's satirical or whether it's flattery or what have you, but it's a cartoon.
And that's us, the Men in Black, as it was said to me.
The Men in White.
Men in White, yeah, absolutely. but yeah, no, I like that. But yeah, you do get people coming up to you of all walks, and I like all those things.
Right.
It's what makes conferences. And obviously, cutting the laughter aside, one of the main things about conferences, and especially Home Firth, because some people have said to me, well, maybe you could get a venue now for 500 people a day. But the thing is, I could probably go to a bigger venue, fill 500, but it'd be in the middle of nowhere, and you would have no infrastructure around it. Whereas in Home Firth, all the shops and restaurants and cafes are literally on your doorstep. So it's a fantastic venue, so it's not going to move from there. But what I may do is have 2 conferences a year and start to do a southern conference in maybe April, May, and then the main magazine conference in Home Firth in the September.
All right then, Gary. That's all from the Men in White for this week. Thanks for coming in again. And
You're welcome.
I'm sure we'll see you again. But until next week, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm the Men in White. Good night.